Now we are ready to look at the 5 lobes of each hemisphere of the brain. And this is just the cerebrum. So these are cerebral lobes. Notice we don't have the brainstem and the diencephalon and the cerebellum here. So this is that big human functioning part. This is the somatic part of your brain. So this is all your consciousness. The first lobe is your frontal lobe. So I'm going to outline each of them, is here. So this is frontal. And your frontal lobe is the part that has your thoughts and personality. And this is also what makes decisions. And remember, when it comes to decisions, the one thing you get to voluntarily control is your skeletal muscle. So right here, this strip right here is your motor cortex. This is the part that sends the signals to your skeletal muscles. So you also have on your frontal lobe the motor cortex, and this is what controls your skeletal muscles. The next part is parietal. That is right here behind the frontal. Parietal is what has your sense of touch. So remember, this is the somatic part of your brain. So all of the somatic senses are going to be coming here to the cerebrum. And you have a couple of special areas. You have the somatosensory cortex. So that is right here. It lies right behind the motor cortex. This is where all those signals from your skin initially go to. So it receives the signals from your skin. Then you also have a somatosensory association area. This is where you remember what things feel like. So like if it's dark or you have your eyes closed, you can reach out and you can touch something and you can figure out what it is based on touch, because this is what remembers what things feel like. And it helps you figure out what you're touching. All right, if we keep moving around, next we get to the occipital lobe. This is in the back of your head. Remember the body regions? You have an occipital body region. This is where sight is, or vision. And it also has a cortex and an association area. So you have the visual cortex. It receives the signals from your eyes. And you have a visual association area. It remembers things and interprets. So whenever you see something, it's taking what you're seeing now, comparing it to what you've seen before to interpret to what you're seeing. Then if we come around to the side, we have temporal. Temporal has two senses. It has hearing and smell. So it has an auditory cortex. This receives the signals from your ears. It has an auditory association area. So it remembers things you've heard before and helps you figure out what you're hearing now. And then you also have an olfactory cortex. Olfaction is the scientific name for smell. So the olfactory cortex receives the signals from your nose. Then our last lobe is the insula. It is right here. Notice these metal rods here and here that are pulling back the other lobes. The insula is found under your frontal lobe. So if you're just looking at the surface of a brain, you can't see the insula because it's tucked underneath the frontal lobe. And think about it. We said your somatic senses all go here. Which sense haven't we covered yet? Taste. So the insula is in charge of your sense of taste. It has the gustatory cortex. So gustatory is the scientific name for taste. Okay, in addition to these lobes, there's two special areas on the brain that we're going to look at. We have right here this little circle and then kind of this bigger area around it. So these are the Wernicke and the Nostoc. And Wernicke is a German word, so it's spelled with a W, but it's pronounced like a V. The Wernicke is what understands language. So right now you hear me talking, but I'm just making noises is all it is. But these noises that I'm making have meaning to you because your Wernicke assigns meaning to them. And you're looking at my writing on the screen. All I'm doing is making shapes on a screen. But those shapes have meaning to you because of your Wernicke. It's interpreting them as language. The Gnostic integrates information from different senses. Okay, so Gnostic means to know. So this lets you know about your environment. It gives you a big picture, comprehensive sense of your environment. Now we're going to look a little more at the motor cortex of the frontal lobe and that somatosensory cortex of the parietal lobe. So if you come here, this ties back to chapter 10 and chapter 6. So here on the motor cortex, this goes with what we learned in chapter 10. And here with the somatosensory cortex, that ties back into chapter 6. Okay, in the chapter 6 lab, remember when you did that activity where you had those calipers, that blue plastic thing, and you poked your lab partner and you would move it a little further apart until they could feel 2 points, and you measured the distance between their sensory receptors? That was called the 2-point discrimination test. And we talked about the homunculus. You had that picture of the homunculus in lab. Well, here again, here's that homunculus. So on your brain, all those signals, when you were poking your lab partner, they were going right here to that somatosensory cortex on the brain. And the brain has a map of the body. So for example, if you poked your lab partner on their elbow, that signal from you poking their elbow came into their brain and it went right here to this part of the brain. And that's how they knew you were poking their elbow. If you poked them on the face, that signal from the face would come in right here and it would go right there. And they would feel you poking them just above their upper lip. Right? So you have this map of the body in your brain. So the somatosensory cortex has a map of the body. And this is how you know which part of your body was touched. So for example, if your brain gets a signal right here, it knows that your thumb was touched. If your brain gets a signal right here, it knows that your knee was touched. So this map is how you know which part of the body sent the signal. Now notice the sizes. The face and the hand are really big. And notice like the arm, the torso, the rest of the body is pretty small. According to your somatosensory cortex, your face, look at the size of the face, is bigger than your whole body, your whole torso put together. It's not that your face is actually bigger, but remember how you learned about the distance between sensory receptors? Your face and your hand have the most sensory receptors. you had the smallest distance there. And the parts of the body that are small have the least receptors. So the more sensitive body parts with the more receptors have larger areas of brain that interpret those signals. Then if we go look at the motor cortex. So think about in chapter 10, we talked about motor units. Remember, a motor unit is one neuron and all the fibers it controls. So notice first of all that we again have a map of the body. So the motor cortex right here in your brain has a map of your body. And again, you have these distorted sizes. The hand and the face are big, and the rest of your body is small compared to them. Well, this time the sizes relate to the size of the motor units. So your hand, remember we talked about fine motor skills? Fine motor skills have small motor units. This means there's only a few fibers per neuron. This is the small teams. This is what I represented with a basketball team. So if there's only a few fibers per neuron, in order to control the whole muscle, you need several neurons. Your hand and face are where you have very fine motor control. You can do fine movements with your finger, like writing. Your face makes facial expressions. Think about how much you can read into someone by looking at their face and their facial expressions. So you have a lot of motor neurons to your hand and face. And that's why they are so big on here. All right, so there is more detail of your cerebrum, the lobes of the cerebrum, and some more information about that motor cortex and somatosensory cortex.